Into the Inklands is gone. Ursula's return is here. And of course, we are now fully into and all very much invested in the new metagame. We've had lots of actual large events over the last couple weeks where we've had 228 player events, a 286 player event, a couple 30 to 40 player events. There's a lot of information to kind of break down and look at today. So let's get into it real nice and quick because yeah, there's a big shift, guys. Let's go. So the week 3 meta report representing a new meta because guys, for the first time in I honestly can't fathom maybe ever, Ruby Amethyst is not the most successful deck on a meta report. And that is so great to say. It is so great to finally be like, yes, guys, we got past it. We finally have moved on, but we will get to Ruby Amethyst in a little bit. This week's report is showcasing Emerald Steel with 17 top cut finishes. So that's either top 16 in large events or top 8 in smaller events. 13 Ruby Sapphires, 7 Sapphire Steels, 4 Ruby Amethyst, and 1, maybe 2 Amber Steels. We have finally done it. We have finally broke the curse that is Ruby Amethyst. I'm just kidding. The deck actually performed very well in some of the larger events, finishing in second place in a couple of them. So deck is definitely not gone away, but it has shifted towards a new type of game. And we're going to cover that deck a bunch. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other things kind of coming to fruition here. Emerald Steel was one of the most successful decks in Into the Inklands. And yes, it got several new cards that really, man, I mean, it really upscaled it to being a more consistently annoying deck for sure. Going back to Bucky, the wonderful itty bitty squirrel that I think everybody has on their watch list right now as one of the worst cards in Disney Lorcana. Maybe we'll get to that in another video. But hey, let's be honest here. Diablo also coming in, adding dual layer threats, just really creating these awful board states to start with in the game. A turn 1 Diablo lets know if your coast is clear. A turn 2 Bucky into a turn 3 Shift Diablo is definitely causing a lot of frustration with most of the community. Ruby Sapphire definitely picked up a lot of nice tools as well. A new removal package. A card like Sisu being able to ramp into is very powerful because it now gives you the ability to quickly remove cards from the board and put a 3-lore character into play, along with gaining some other like smaller Sisus that are definitely great cards in themselves. So while the big Sisu and the Floodborn Sisu is magnificent, the lower 3-cost Sisus each have their roles to play as well. Sapphire Steel, this is a deck that over the course of time I think has always been the most difficult deck to play in Disney Lorcana. That might not be true anymore, but it's definitely still on that same scale. The core factor here is that it gained a lot, 4 pieces of consistency, which is the Fortispheres. Getting those 4 more popsicles has really smoothed out this deck and kind of created some very interesting play lines with some older cards that never got a whole lot of love that are starting to come back. So definitely a deck that we're going to be looking to talk about. Ruby Amethyst, Amber Steel, we're going to cover those. We also have a couple other decks that we're going to be taking a peek at behind the curtain for decks that didn't make top 8s, but they were still kind of doing okay in some of these other events that we're just going to touch on. But first and foremost, let's get into Emerald Steel. And Into the Inklands, we were very focused on Curse Merfolks, Flynn Riders, Prince Johns, and Ursula, Deceiver of Alls to kind of pressure the game so very early with 2 lore characters and really just finish out the game before sometimes your opponent even has a chance to interact with you. This is kind of different now. We actually dropped a lot of the 2 lore characters and we're more focused on 1 lore characters, but we're really focused on Bucky and Diablo. Bucky, of course, the wonderful friendly squirrel that everyone probably wants to throw acorns at this point, is a bit of a menace into the metagame. With the addition of Ursula's return, giving us not 1, but 2 3-cost Floodborn characters, has proven to really up the scales on Bucky's favor. The idea that you can start any game with Pegasus or Diablo and then play Bucky and on turn 3 start shifting out and doing really unfair things in matchups and start threatening gaining lore with Pegasus for 2 lore, taking a card out of our opponent's hand. We also have Robin Hood, which is not a 3-cost Floodborn character, but again, another shift 3. So this deck effectively has Diablo, Robin Hood, Pegasus, and Aladdin at 3 costs to turn on Bucky immediately. And the crazy thing about this is that obviously Aladdin and Diablo have very real text box. Both of those text box are relevant to the game state. Robin Hood is still a massive character and hard to deal with. Pegasus gives your board a bit of a evasive shell for a turn, which allows for kind of free lore gains in certain board states. Things of the past that are definitely not familiar to this deck. In set 3, we really didn't have Grab Your Swords and Tinkerbells in this deck. They just weren't really around. We also weren't playing Jafar. Now you can kind of see that these cards are coming in because of Jafar, Beast, Robin, Tinkerbell, all leading up past the 3-cost spot. Just playing a character with Bucky to gain additional card advantage through discard is wonderful. The Ursula Deceiver here is one of the more problematic cards in the game because a lot of the ways to answer what Emerald Steel is trying to accomplish would be through songs. But with the Ursula Deceiver, we're actually able to find out if our opponent has certain songs early enough. We can remove them ourselves and then focus down the rest of the hand. The one card we haven't really talked about is Hidden Cove. Hidden Cove at first glance probably looks a little innocent. And you would think that a +1 strength and +1 willpower doesn't mean a whole lot. But on games where we don't have Bucky, or it's more important to protect our Diablo rather than making our opponent discard a card with Bucky, you can still have a turn 1 Diablo into a turn 2 shift Diablo, play Hidden Cove, attach Diablo to the Hidden Cove. Now it's a 3/3, really getting past a lot of what the metagame is trying to utilize to remove it. Cards like Brawl, Fire the Cannons, Baboom, all of these cards are immediately turned off. Opposing Diablos are also turned off. We now trade with Pegasus. It really does a lot of things, in all honesty. What it also does later in the game is keep your characters out of range of Medusa or out of Sisu and cards like that that also can interact with your board. Now, by putting a Robin Hood or a Beast in the Hidden Cove, all of a sudden, those cards just become dead cards in your opponent's hand, being unable to remove certain characters. This deck has been successful in picking up a ton of unique pieces and being a frustrating piece of the metagame in general. This deck and Jordan Bashi won the 268-player tournament this weekend during the pack event. Huge shout out to him. Great win, and honestly, a pretty phenomenal deck list. Another successful Emerald Steel deck this weekend was in Belgium. This was a 128-player event, and the core fundamental differences between this deck played by Alexandra and the previous deck played by Jordan is this list is representing And Then Along Came Zeus and Ursula Deceiver of All, while the previous list was not playing Zeus or Ursula, which is a very interesting note here. So Alexandra picking up the win, going 7-0 in the Belgium TCG 128-player tournament, was still on the Ursula Deceiver of All train. What I like about Ursula Deceiver of All is that her and Diablo complement one another so very well. Yes, with Diablo, we have to discard one of our action cards, but in any game where we can play a Diablo on 1, a Bucky on 2, discard an action to shift our Diablo on 2, and then on turn 3, play Ursula. Now all of a sudden we have 2 of the best 3-cost characters in the game in play, and our opponent simply can't answer them both. So you have to make them choose which is worse. Can you gain more advantage with Ursula, or can you gain more advantage with Diablo? Giving them this dual threat choice makes the other one kind of that much better. Aside from that, this list is pretty much the exact from the other that we just went over. And Then Along Came Zeus is a wonderful choice, and it's a little bit of agency towards getting rid of locations, which can be a problematic play line for this deck, but in all honesty, most of the time we're able to get rid of all our cards in our opponent's hand and then you whittle off the opponent's characters. And if they're only gaining 1 or 2 lore a turn from locations, you can actually outrace them pretty easily. And when you need to, you can pick off a location. So it's not really that big of a deal. Your deck actually might end up being slightly better without and then Along Came Zeus, but it also does play a nice role within the mirror matches of getting rid of, beasts and things like that. What I will say is that this particular list also does not have Grab Your Swords. I think Grab Your Swords is probably one of the best cards in Disney Lorcana right now. Even if we're only ever playing to outs, being able to play to the out of drawing and Grab Your Swords in certain matches right now is probably better than not having it all. Sisu on Ice picked up a first place win at the Lorcana Day 4 tournament, which was 128 players. Ruby Sapphire, at the start of every metagame since the release of Hiram, has proven to be a deck that people gravitate towards. In this set, we did pick up a new 1-cost item in the form of Ice Block, which is nice. So when you're done with it, you can eat it with your Hiram, draw a couple more cards. That's wonderful. Last set, this deck also picked up a card like How Far I'll Go, which was obviously a really phenomenal card, along with Lucky Dime to win games. This current set, in Ursula's Return, we picked up a new removal package. Having Brawl as a 3-cost inkable, Arceus 3 as a nice lore gain card early on, and also can be utilized as an effective removal tool, along with our Floodborn Sisu to come down and be kind of be prepared in its own way in certain matchups, specifically in any game in which you can go 1 jump on 2, How Far I Go on 3, Medusa on 4. You can kind of play these nice games where you stave off the board from the problematic characters, and then Sisu plus Ice Block can come in, clear out whatever you really need to. You obviously still have all the other removal as well, having Be Prepared's, Maleficence, and Maui's. The Ruby package of removal just continues to showcase its ability to be really problematic within the Lorcana metagames and very, very strong in general. And then, of course, we have the biggest of all, the Tamatoa, finding his way into winning lots and lots of games. Now that you have Ice Block, Popsicle, Fishbone Quill, and Lucky Dime, there's definitely plenty of ways for the gigantic 5 strength, 8 willpower crab to just close out games whenever you need to. Sapphire Steel has continuously evolved over the last couple sets, but this is the first time we're really seeing the deck be successful without Whole New World. A Whole New World has always been one of the biggest factors in the success of this list. Being able to Fishbone Quill away and gain resource advantage while playing cards, getting characters on board, being able to sing songs with said characters is really a way to move the game in such a fashion that your opponent has to play differently. The coolest thing about this list in general is the removal of a Whole New World. So while your opponent is still considering that you are a Whole New World deck, you necessarily aren't, which is really going to cause problems for some of the metagame that have to pivot their way and strategy against Sapphire Steel lists. That's actually one of the greatest things about that. The instance of surprise, I would say. Tyler here is a friend from Columbus. We actually met last week at the DLC. Seeing his name come up in the top 16 was awesome. He was actually a really successful day 1, lost in top 16, unfortunately. But this list is really sweet. If we talk about Shen Po for a second here, that's a card that I'm sure many read and were like, yeah, this card sucks. It's unplayable. But when you really think about it, and him being a 4 strength, 7 willpower bodyguard, the one lore, isn't great, but he only costs 5 and he's inkable. So he comes into play on 5. He can protect all of your characters that you want to be protected, like Hiram. For starters, it can protect Beast, it can protect Ariel. It does a lot of really great things for you. And I think that's why this card is going to end up being pretty awesome. Obviously, he can sing Let It Go and Grab Your Sword and Along Came Zeus, which is all great because he covers and checks all those bounds. And that's definitely probably better than gaining 1 lore by questing. But in the end, the gigantic body is proving to be a really difficult card for players to interact with, and he trades very well into most of the metagame. The other important thing to note about this particular Steel Sapphire list here, played by Tyler, is there are 0 Boom, there are 0 Smash, but we have 1 and then along came Zeus, 1 Avalanche, 4 Grab Your Swords, 4 Let It Go. We talked about it at the front, but the obvious consistency added to the deck from Fortisphere and from Popsicles definitely goes a long way. I think Cruella de Vil is a very interesting card to be playing, but my honest opinion is the 3-2 stat line is not really the card you want. I would actually be considering the new Steel Broom, which is a 2-3, just because that is one less way for your opponent to interact with your, I guess, answer to early Diablos. If we're not able to simply play a one jump to get into a better turn 4 play. What I really do enjoy about this list is the idea that you can start really quickly early. Just seeing a one jump or a fishbone quill, either one of those cards gives you the option to have a turn 4 grab your swords, which I think is really good in this current metagame. Yes, I know that if your opponent plays the Seer of All, you kind of like takes it away, but you're playing 4 of them. You're also playing so many ways to draw cards, so you can kind of draw multiples pretty easily. I just think that right now that playing 4 grab your swords in this particular list is probably correct. The Avalanche also can just, very easily get rid of a Bucky and maybe like a Pegasus or something like that if they hadn't shifted yet. So that card can still be pretty great. All in all, the 4 Let It Goes is something we haven't seen in forever, which a true tip of the hat there. If that card's been performing very well, then I think that that's really good for Sapphire decks in general. Obviously, the win condition here is Lucky Dime. I would imagine that most of his games are won just from Lucky Diming his opponent, whether it be with the 2s from any one of the 2 lore characters. Either beast is fine. The Tinkerbell, obviously, also fine. Benja can even get it done. But of course, Ariel and Tamatoa are the all-stars here for gigantic lore swings. And I imagine that's how we're winning a ton of our games with this particular list. Shout out to Tyler again, and congratulations on a great finish. Hey guys, it was awesome seeing so many of you last weekend in the DLC. I would love it if really, in all honesty, if you're looking to support us in a nice way and really showcase that you're a true Forbidden Mountain fan, you want to pick up some swag, pick up a shirt. You can see here we have shirts, we have hoodies, there's bags, different logos that you can check out. Of course, Team Zimba. I know you guys hate it, but hey, listen, it's just the way I talk, guys. I'm so sorry. It's just how it happens. But, we have more designs as well. If you are definitely looking to support us, that's a great way to do it. Check out the pro shop that we have. The link will be in the description or the pinned comment. And right now, it's actually 20% off everything for the next 3 days. So definitely nice way to get some, support us, get some swag, show off the Forbidden Mountain. And then when I see you in the distance and I see you coming up, I know for sure that you are a true fan. Thank you guys for all the love at DLC Atlanta. I cannot wait to see everyone in Chicago. I had a blast. Pictures, signatures, high fives, fist bumps, hugs, all of it. It was so much fun. Thank you guys for all the wonderful support. If you haven't yet, hit this like on this video. And for whatever reason, if you enjoy the content, first time here, you kind of like the vibe, don't forget to hit subscribe. We are nearing a very great number, and I'm very excited to hit it. So thank you guys so much in advance. And let's get into the other decks. Amethyst Ruby is the gift that keeps on giving. Honestly, if you looked at the reveal season going on during Ursula's return, you can see from this particular list that Amethyst really did not get much love at all. Yes, we have a Dolores Madrigal in this list, but I'd argue it honestly, from my point of view, from playing with the card, from seeing the card be played, it's probably the worst card in this deck, and it's the first card that I would cut and remove. I think that Maleficent Sorceress is just flat out better than Dolores in just about every interaction that you can possibly imagine. While the 4-cost 3/3/2 lore looks good and sounds good on paper, really we're playing Maleficent to always replace a card in our hand. And the fact that Dolores does not always do that, it's kind of just a problem. It's something that we never want to be playing a 4-cost 3/3/2 lore that with no effect. That's just a bad card. So relying on our opponents to have exerted characters to draw the card, I just don't think it's worth the risk. I'd rather just play a card that lets me draw the cards. That's the first card I'm removing from this list. Aside from that, Flynn Rider. This is a card that I've been touting about since the moment it was revealed. I think this card is an all-star in the metagame. I think it punishes slow control decks. It really forces them to change their turns. It forces decks to not just simply ramp. They have to take a turn off. They have to brawl it. They have to baboom it. They have to fire the cannons it. Because otherwise, you can really start running away with the game. And I have definitely played games where Flynn Rider has gained 8 lore before turn 4. Turn 3, gain 3 lore. Turn 4, gain 3 lore. Along the way, lore twice. That's 8 lore out of a 2-cost character in certain matchups. And the crazy thing is, he's inkable. So even in your bad matchups, you can ink him. If you draw him later in the game, you can ink him. There's also worlds where in the end of the game, putting Maui plus Flynn Rider in play might force an opponent's board removal because you can't just allow Flynn Rider to sit and gain 3 lore. He also combos incredibly well with Sisu 3, along with B King Undisputed. You really can have certain lines where you're just like, okay, I'm going to Minnie Mouse on 1, Flynn on 2, Sisu on 3, B King Undisputed on 4, and then I can just castle on 5, move something to the castle, and really you're just gaining like 10 to 15 lore before your opponent has ever had an interaction in the game. This card is super, super punishing to slow control decks. I think it's a great card for aggro. I'm very curious to see if we can find this character a home in other decks within the metagame. Ruby Amethyst as a whole felt pretty fair this weekend. I tested a bunch with it. Queen's Castle is still one of the best cards in the game. It's without a doubt probably still the best location in the game. And this deck with Flynn Rider pressuring lore early really can slam dunk wins with just the follow-up castle. It's actually kind of insane how powerful this deck can be against the slower decks in the metagame, but we are definitely way more weak to the Emerald Steel decks now. They can get to the point where they actually remove most of our cards from our hand before we can ever get off the ground. And we're kind of relying on drawing friends on the other side off the top, having rabbits go infinite, a long while with still trying to interact with the board, which is way, way more difficult now with Bucky in play and him being a ward character and us not having an answer to him at all, really, unless our opponent gets greedy and we can be King Undisputed. There's worlds where sometimes our opponent is left on 2 characters and we can brawl one of them and then sing Be King Undisputed and kind of get the Bucky that way. But those lines are very, very few and far between, and they're just unreliable in general. I do think this deck has a place in the metagame as long as the more controlling decks are still being that greedy. But if there is a world where those decks start making modifications to deal with Flynn Rider, then I don't know how reliable this deck will be moving forward. Time will tell, though. Amber Steel, this was the only lonely top contender for Amber Steel this past weekend. All in all, if you really look at this list, it looks pretty much the same. Only a very few new cards at it, which is the 1 Aladdin Brave Rescuer and 2 of our new Ariel. I do love this Ariel in this list in general. I think it's very thematic and synergizes incredibly well, but I don't know that it's really that impactful. And I think that's part of the problem here. If you really look at this list, you see Cinderella 1, Robin Hood 1, Queen 1, Smee, Piglet, the Flutes. I'd argue that if you can fit the Uninkables, that Perdita would just be better than Ariel on average. Her ability to, when you sing a song, remove characters, honestly, probably isn't good enough. The metagame isn't shaped in that way to where you're really getting full benefits from that, where you could just get the same amount of just playing either more grab your swords or things like that. Just way more interaction. I don't know. I hope that card, maybe I'm wrong, and the card is a little more powerful, but we all know, if you guys can remember how I feel about Cinderella Short Stouted, which is a 1 of in this list. I think Ariel might be on the same level to where she has all the right tools and fits in all the right ways, but I just don't know the metagame is calling for her. If there was more mid-range decks laying around with, multiple characters kind of sitting in play and doing some stuff, then I think she'd have some more love. But that's not really the game we're playing right now. So I just don't know how often her effect is going to be impactful enough. It does make certain matchups against Sapphire decks a little more feasible if they can't answer the aerial right away, because it kind of turns all of your actions to trade up to do 3 more damage against some of the more problematic characters that you have to answer. But all in all, I don't know that it's going to end up being good enough. It's probably almost always ink in all the discard matchups. And if those are the more played decks in the game, then I'm not sure she's the right card to be including in your deck. All right, so I wanted to take a look at some of these deck lists that we've been and just really showcasing the tournaments. So this was the first tournament. We talked about this a little bit last week, but 8 Emerald Steel decks in top 8. Is that a problem? Maybe. There's 8 here. Obviously, an Emerald Steel deck won this tournament. In 2 of the other tournaments here, you're going to see yes, Ruby Sapphire wins in this one. It's a little more diverse here. We have 4 Ruby Sapphires, 3 Emerald Steels, and then 1 Amber Steel. So obviously, it's not 8. It's not 8 Emerald Steels, so that's very good for everybody. But it is still kind of like one of those where, all right, it's pretty dominated by Emerald Steel still. Then we have this one again, a little more diverse, a lot closer. If you're looking at that, you have 1 Emerald Steel, 2 Emerald Steel, and then 3 Sisu on ice, which is the Ruby Sapphire decks. And then a Sapphire Steel picks up a top 8 here. And then, of course, the Ruby Amethyst. So in 2 separate events, we had Emerald Steel and Ruby Amethyst in the finals. This version of Ruby Amethyst was more of an Isabella deck, which was a little different than the list that I showcased here. If you remember, in the description below, I always have the Inkdex tournaments linked, so you can go and find these specific lists and find these specific decks. The last one here was the top 16. In this, I couldn't fit all 16 in one screenshot, sadly, but you can see 4 Emerald Steel, 5 Ruby Sapphires, 1 Ruby Amethyst, 1 Sapphire Steel. So we're still missing a bunch of different ink combinations here. On this list in total that we had today, was only 5 decks that made top 16 cuts between the ink combinations. So while these tournaments are not, they're nowhere near as diverse as Into the Inklands, they're also not all, thankfully, they don't all look like this one, right? Like, this was very alarming last week. I think people were definitely going a little crazy about it, but you can see we picked up some more options, picking up Sapphire Ruby, Sapphire Steel, Ruby Amethyst, and Amber Steel, all kind of finding its way into top cuts, which is very, very good for the game in general. But there were some lists that people were talking about. I went looking for them and how they were successful in some of these tournaments. And some of them did come back with results that were positive, but not like, oh my God, this is like meta breaking or anything like that. So these are decks that I just think we shouldn't forget about. They probably might still exist. You might still see them be played in DLC. So let's just take a quick look at a couple of these. So Amber Emerald was a deck that was really talked up a bunch early on when the first spoilers were coming out, when people were finally able to play with the set. Under the Sea plus Ariel was just super flavorful. Kita was like bought out on TCG Player maybe twice. People thought that this deck was going to be like the greatest thing ever, and it was going to be like really awful play interactions. And so far to date, no one has really cracked that code. The list hasn't performed exceptional. It had 0 top 8s or top 16s this weekend. So this is a list that has been unrefined so far. You might see some of these in your DLC coming up, or in your local 1Ks, 2Ks, whatever you're playing in. Those are all potential things that I would just consider like, hey, maybe this deck does show up, so you should know that it's still there, it still exists, and it can still be frustrating to play against. The other deck that I think a lot are pretty shocked by not being as successful is Amethyst Steel. Amethyst Steel seemingly has all of the answers that it needs to interact with Emerald Steel, but it lost a lot of its leverage in certain other matchups. So because those other matchups became worse, this deck kind of ends up not being as good. It's also not as reliable into the Emerald Steel decks. So while it does a lot of great things, it's still missing some things. I think this particular list is probably just a step too far. I still don't think Cinderella is very good. I don't even think she really impacts the game in any way right now. There aren't many characters that you even can utilize her to work towards. There just aren't mid-range decks right now that Cinderella would come in and kind of like even out the playing field and remove things. It can't trade into Tamatoa. On average, Ariel doesn't even have to be exerted. So, like, that's a problem. There's a bunch of evasive characters that this card doesn't interact with. So, I just don't think that card's doing you anything. It's probably, without a doubt, a waste of a slot. The Cinderella 2 is another card that I just think that is just not good enough. So, I would be looking to remove that as well. The Peter Pan is great. It does do okay things. But in a world where you just have smash, ba-boom, fire the cannons, grab your swords, like there's just so many other things you can be doing that I don't think you need Peter Pan at all in this particular list. I could see Peter Pan's being played in Ruby Amethyst list as a potential out, but not really Amethyst Steels. So while I think that there's a good reason why this list only finished in the top 32, actually it was the top 64 of the pack event, this is still a deck that I would probably plan to see or play against in upcoming weeks. I think people are still going to be working towards this and kind of working in different characters and different cards to make these a little bit more playable. I will say the Song that Destroys All Items is definitely an interesting card to include. Are starting to see Sapphire Steel decks that are very reliant on just putting 7 or 8 items into play and then playing their Tamatoa and lucky diming it, gaining 9 out of nowhere, and kind of just saying, hey, I'm going to win the game because of it. So if you're able to play the Song and really, really shut down that, you might slow down the Sapphire Steel decks enough so you can actually come up on top of those matchups that are in general really difficult. So I do think there's a way better version of this list in existence. I just think that some of the card choices here in the end aren't really knowledgeable of the metagame, and they're probably just like way too over the top. Isabella is a card that I think looks really, really phenomenal, but in the end is just not good enough. There's just far too many ways to remove it from like legitimately every single angle now. You know, Zeus removes it. We don't talk about Bruno can remove it. Medusa removes it. The list just kind of goes on and on and on. And I don't think that she's just like ever worth a slot. So I just think that this list can definitely be remodeled a bit to be a little more effective moving forward in a more predicted and known metagame. So there we have it. A new meta has been presented in the past few weeks. We've only had 5 decks. That's it. 5 different in combinations and different versions and variations, obviously, of Emerald Steel. They're really all mostly Diablo focused. Whether or not we're playing Ursula is kind of the contention. Ruby Sapphire is all pretty much straightforward. Not a whole lot of new interactions going there or differences. Sapphire Steel has definitely proven to be a whole new world, or Maury's Workshops, which I know we didn't see, but it's definitely a card that people have been playing and talking about. So that's like another version that I would consider seeing kind of show up and pop up. Ruby Amethyst now leaning on Flynn Rider to be more of a aggressive mid-rangey deck, but it's like a mid-rangey deck in a weird way where you're just kind of like gaining a bunch of lore early and then gaining lore late from locations and then finishing the game with just the goat bounce. So it's definitely not that traditional controlling deck with 4 Medusa, 3 Lady Tremaines, 4 Be Prepared. Like those things aren't happening anymore. So it is definitely a different feel, but it has a place within the metagame. Amber Steel, I honestly think is the most difficult. I think the deck has like all the right tools to be successful, but it also still has to like draw everything in the right order. You probably still have to play off the top of your deck a bunch and drawing the specific cards that you need to be successful. So there's just a lot going on. But all in all, DLC Chicago is in 3 days. I'll be there. A lot of the team TFM will be there. I'm very excited to participate in this tournament. I love new formats. I know that a lot of people have been complaining about certain things. And hey, listen, nothing's going to get done before the DLC. So if the DLC comes out and the metagame is miserable and people hate it, then hopefully we can make some, shake some trees, knock some twigs, and do whatever we have to maybe fix the metagame before set championships. But as of right now, I think we all need to just pump brakes, slow down, take a breath, and just, get through the weekend and really see if some of these great players and great teams in Lorcana Forbidden Mountain had 7 people in the top 100. Labyrinth had 32 players in the top. I'm sorry, 5 players in the top 32. Luxury Gaming had 3 or 4 people in the top 149. There's all these things. Separatist also had some great success. All those players were focused, and I mean hyper focused on Atlanta. So now that we have a new metagame, and while we have obviously seen Bucky and Diablo be successful early on, I think it's easy to play the most uh, obvious things early while you're still developing and figuring out other things. That still might happen in Chicago. Chicago might be like, hey, this deck is like really close, but I still can't really figure it out. And just because like it's missing something and I don't have time to figure it out, maybe I just play Emerald Steel and I move on with life. That might happen. A lot of players might resort to that, and that's fine. Like that's just the way the time frame of this event and that event really is showcasing, is that we all had to focus for an extra week on Into the Inklands metagame, where if we had that extra week to focus on Chicago only, then maybe we wouldn't be as worried or as concerned. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be, because Bucky is a concerning card, Cogsworth is a concerning card. The list goes on and on and on, in all honesty. But, that's just the ward mechanic. It's the lack of like ways to really interact with it. So we'll have to see how Chicago goes. If Chicago goes incredibly poorly and there's like 32 Emerald Steel decks in the top 64, then yeah, maybe we can start, like I said, just knock some trees or something. But for now, thank you guys so much for hanging out. Yet, if you haven't yet, for whatever reason, you want to hit that like button for me, it does help. Thank you so much. If you've enjoyed the video, first time here, I do meta reports weekly. This is one of the key factors of the channel and information that I present. Graphs like this, and sometimes we'll even have more if there's even more things to talk about. But in this week, we just had these. Thank you guys so much for hanging out today, and I will catch you in the next one. If you're in Chicago, make sure you stop by, fist bump, handshake, high five, hug, picture, whatever it is, I'm there for you. Thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate everything. Love you. Catch you in Chicago.